There is a man buried somewhere under Rome whose name was deleted on purpose. He was born a slave. He was sold in chains more than once by men who priced him the way you'd price a mule. And by the time he died, he owned the men who had owned him. He controlled the treasury of the entire known world. He could end a senator with a single sentence whispered into the right ear. The richest human being on the planet was a man somebody had once bought. And here is the part nobody tells you. The chains never actually came off. They just moved from his wrists to his soul. To understand the man with no name, you first have to understand the world that built him. Rome ran on slavery, not as an embarrassment at the margins, as the engine in the center. By the height of the empire, perhaps 1 in 3 people in Italy was owned by someone else. They mined the silver, they taught the children, they kept the accounts, they wrote the letters. An educated slave was not a man with a shovel, he was a piece of intellectual machinery. And the cleverest of them were worth more than estates. And here's the thing about Rome that almost no one expects. Slavery in Rome was not always a life sentence. A clever slave, a useful slave, a slave who made his master rich could be freed manumitted. He became a libertus, a freedman. He took his old master's family name and a measure of his old master's protection, and he walked out into the city as something new. Not a citizen with a clean past, a man with a brand on his history that everyone could read. Now imagine you are that man. You were born owned. You have spent your whole life watching free men hold something you were not allowed to want. Status, name, the right to be looked at as a person. And then one day a door opens. What do you do with a hunger that has been starved your entire life? The moment the leash comes off. Some freedmen opened shops, some farmed, and a very small, very dangerous handful walked straight into the most powerful house on earth, the household of the emperor himself, and never left. Because here is a secret the Senate hated to say out loud. The Roman Empire was not really run by the Senate. By the 1st century, it was run out of the emperor's bedroom, and the emperor's bedroom was staffed by freedmen. They had titles that sound like nothing and meant everything. Ab epistulis, the one who controls the emperor's correspondence. A rationibus, the one who controls the emperor's accounts, the treasury of the world. A libellus, the one who decides which petitions, which pleas, which desperate requests ever reach the emperor's eyes at all. Think about that. Last one. A man born in chains now decided who got to be heard by the most powerful person alive. And he was not above charging for the privilege. The 2 most famous were Pallas and Narcissus, freedmen of the Emperor Claudius. Narcissus, the secretary, was said to be worth 400 million sesterces. Pallas, the accountant, perhaps 300 million. To give you a sense of scale, when the Senate voted Pallas an honorary award in a sum of 15 million sesterces, Pallas, with breathtaking arrogance, declined the money. He kept the honor and refused the cash. Because the cash was nothing to him, the honor, the bow from men who would have spat on his slave, self. That was the thing he was actually starving for. Now, I want to introduce you to a different man, same century, same institution. A man who started in the exact same place, born a slave, owned, bought. His name was Epictetus. And he chose the opposite road, where Pallas climbed the ladder of fortune until it swallowed him whole. Epictetus looked at the ladder, understood precisely what it was, and stepped off it on purpose. We are told his master was a man named Epaphroditus, who was himself a freedman, a former slave who had clawed his way into the household of the Emperor Nero. Sit with that for a moment. A freedman who had escaped slavery, and the first thing he did with his freedom was buy a slave of his own. The chain did not break, it just found a new place to bite. And there is a story, perhaps true, perhaps the kind of story that becomes true by being repeated, that this master once twisted Epictetus's leg for sport. Epictetus, calm, is said to have warned him. If you keep doing that, you will break it. The master kept going. The leg broke, and Epictetus said only, "There, I told you it would break." No scream, no plea. He was lame for the rest of his life, and he never once described it as a misfortune. How does a man have his body broken by another man's idle cruelty and not call it suffering? Because Epictetus had already worked out the single idea that this entire video turns on. He had divided the world into 2 columns. The things that are up to me and the things that are not. This is the foundation. Everything Epictetus taught hangs from this one hook. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. up to us our judgments, our desires, our intentions, what we choose to chase and what we choose to refuse, the use we make of our own attention. Not up to us. Our body, our property, our reputation, our office, our status, whether other people respect us, whether the emperor smiles at us, whether we are slave or free in the eyes of the law. Now watch what this does to the story of Pallas and Narcissus. Every single thing those men spent their lives accumulating. The 400 million sesterces, the senators bowing, the titles, the power to be heard, every last piece of it sits in the second column. Not up to them, given by fortune. And anything fortune gives, fortune can take back in an afternoon. Epictetus had a brutal image for this. He said, when you go to a banquet, dishes are passed around. When the dish reaches you, reach out and take a modest portion. Politely, if it passes you by, do not clutch at it. If it has not yet reached you, do not stretch your desire toward it down the table, but wait. And then he turns the knife. Do this with your children. Do this with your position. Do this with your wealth. Treat all of it as a dish passed at a banquet that was never yours to keep. The freedman who needs the status to feel real has done the opposite. He has lunged down the table, grabbed the dish with both hands. And now he cannot put it down without feeling like he is being unmade. He does not own the status. The status owns him. Here is the trap, stated as plainly as I can state it. The higher the freedman climbed, the more completely he belonged to the thing he was climbing. This is not a metaphor. It is mechanics. To rise in the emperor's house, you had to be useful to the emperor to stay risen. You had to remain useful every day, forever, with no day off, no retirement, no exit. You had read every petition, knowing one missed plot could cost you your head. You flattered the right faction. You watched the next freedman climbing behind you the way you had once climbed behind someone else. You were free in name. You were never, for one waking hour, free, in fact. And the ending was written into the beginning. Narcissus, 400 million sesterces, the most powerful secretary in the empire, outlived his protector Claudius by a matter of weeks. The new regime had no use for him. He was arrested. He was driven to death. The fortune meant nothing. It could not buy him a single additional sunrise. Pallas lingered a few years longer, immensely rich, increasingly hated, until the Emperor Nero, the story goes, grew tired of waiting for that enormous estate to come back to the crown, and had him poisoned for it. The accountant who could not be bought was, in the end, simply killed for the balance. Epictetus watched men exactly like this his whole life. And he said something that should be carved over every door in every capital city on earth. No man is free who is not master of himself, he said. The man you should pity is not the slave in the field. Pity the freedman in the palace, trembling at a frown, sleeping at a summons, sick with fear that the favor that lifted him will tomorrow let him drop. Show me a man, Epictetus said, who, though sick, is happy, though in danger is happy, though dying is happy, though condemned is happy. Show me him. I want to see a Stoic. He was not describing the richest men in Rome. He was describing the freedom they had sold to get there. So let's return to the man under Rome with the deleted name, because Rome had a specific, terrifying instrument for this. Damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. When Rome truly wanted to destroy a man, it did not just kill his body. It went back and unmade his existence. They chiseled his name off the monuments. They scraped him out of the inscriptions. They struck his face from the coins, melted the statues, burned the records. The goal was not death. The goal was as if he had never lived at all. And here is the cruelest joke fortune ever played on the climbing freedman. The very thing he sold his soul for, to be seen, to be remembered, to have his name carved where the men who once owned him would have to read it. That was the exact thing Rome could reach back and delete with a chisel and an afternoon's work. He built his whole self out of the one material the world is most eager to destroy. He poured his entire being into the second column. And the second column is, by definition, the one you do not control. Now hold that beside the slave who walked the other way. They could break Epictetus's leg, and they did. They could keep him a slave, and they did. For years, they could give him nothing. No name worth carving, no fortune, no office. But there was one thing not a single emperor, not all the legions of Rome, not the chisel of Damnatio Memoriae could reach. They could not get into the one column that was his. They could not make him judge his broken leg a catastrophe. They could not force his soul to call itself a slave. And so the freedmen with 400 million sesterces were erased from history on purpose. And the lame slave who owned nothing is still being quoted word for word 2,000 years later. Tonight, by me, to you. It would be dishonest to end without naming what this is not. This is not a tidy moral that says poverty is good and ambition is evil. Epictetus did not tell his students to refuse a better life. He told them to hold it loosely. There is nothing wrong with the dish when it reaches you. The danger is in the lunging, the reaching down the table, the clutching, the building of your entire self out of what fortune merely lent you. The freedmen are not villains. They are us magnified. They wanted to be seen. So do we. They were starved of dignity and gorged the moment they could. Who, honestly, would have done differently? And it is not a promise that the Stoic escapes pain. Epictetus limped for the rest of his life. He felt it. He simply refused to let the world tell him what that broken leg meant. He kept the one thing, the judgment, the verdict, the use of his own attention. He did not conquer fortune. He just stopped letting fortune conquer the only part of him that was ever really his. On most days, and on the days he failed, like Marcus in his tent, he got up the next morning and ran the discipline again. So there are two men in this story, and they began in the same chains. One climbed, he took the name, the gold, the bowing senators, the treasury of the world. He poured himself entirely into the column he did not control, and the world in its own time reached over and erased him so completely, we are not certain where he is buried. The other man stayed low, kept almost nothing, and guarded the one column that was his with everything he had, and he is the one still speaking. The lesson is not about Rome. You will not be a freedman in an emperor's palace, but you will be offered the ladder. You already have been. The promotion that owns your evenings, the number that has to keep climbing or you feel unmade, the audience whose approval you reach for down the table, both hands open, terrified it will pass you by. That is the palace. The chains are exactly as real. They have just moved from the wrists to the soul. A man who needs the world's status to feel real has already handed the world the key to him. And the freedom Epictetus found, broken, owned with nothing, is still available tonight to anyone willing to ask the one question that costs nothing and changes everything. Is this thing that is ruling me actually mine? Or am I lunging down the table for a dish that was only ever passed? Stone and iron, thank you for sitting with this one. If essays like this are useful to you, the channel is here for them. Subscribe if you want more.